So now we're at the part where we're going to build the battery board. And I wanted just to point out the tools that we're going to need. We're going to need our solder. We're going to need our digital multimeter. Going to need our pliers and our wire strippers. And the components needed for the battery board is the second proto board, 3 AAA batteries, red and black leads, the slide switch, the 4-pin female header, and the power regulator that we assembled earlier. So this is a little closer look at it. And then, of course, the battery compartment. And if we remove the cover, you can see that 3 AAA batteries could be inserted into the container. And notice on the bottom of the compartment is double-sided sticky tape. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my soldering iron. And as it's heating up, I'm going to make plans on where to put all my components on my proto board. So the battery compartment is, we're going to have to place it on the board, giving it enough room. So enough room at the top that when we do the final assembly, we can get the standoffs actually connected to these pads at the end. And we need to give ourselves enough room so that we can put our components such as the power regulator and the slide switch. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and solder our 4-pin header and our slide switch to the proto board. I'm going to place the header on the top of the proto board, like so. I'm going to go down the middle row or middle column of the proto board. I'm going to do the same thing with the slide switch. Okay, so this is about where everything is going to be positioned. So I'm going to go ahead and tape down as much as I can. The header for the power regulator, and try to get that as squared off as possible. I can make adjustments as I'm soldering, so this is now kind of taped down. It's a little bit cockeyed. And I'll need to tape down the switch too. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. So we're making note of the positions of where all these pins are, because we're going to have to connect them up later. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and solder this down. So what you should see is in the close-up here, let me turn it just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and solder these in place. Okay, so now we have both the power switch and the header for the power regulator installed. We're going to configure this that if the switch is down, this is the off position, and when the switch is up, this is the on position. So I'm going to show you the bottom of the power regulator, like so. So we have a V out at the top, a ground, and a V in. The last pin at the bottom is not used. Okay. And so the way this is going to map out, so I'm just going to go ahead and point it out. The top pin is V out. The second pin from the top is ground. The third pin from the top is V in. The battery we're going to connect to V in. Okay, so probably right here. The ground will connect to this connector right here. So these two pads here. So I want to make a note that this entire row is connected. So when we bridge this, this becomes ground. And so this is ground. And V out is what goes to the switch. When we connect V out, we're going to make a connection from here to here. Okay, and this whole entire row is connected, and we're going to bridge the connection from here. Oh, sorry, from here to here. So what this is going to do is when the power regulator is installed, it's going to take the 4.5 volts that we get from the batteries, and it's going to regulate the voltage to 3.3 volts. And that's what the rest of the bus is going to see. Okay, we're going to go from V out. When the switch is on, it's going to send 3.3 positive volts to the power rail. And then from the battery compartment, we're going to connect the positive lead down here to the V in, and we're going to connect the negative to the ground rail here. So, first things first, we're going to start with connecting, bridging connections for the ground, and bridging connections for the power switch, and of course to the rail. So I'm going to cut off a little piece of wire, like so. And I think I'm going to start with when the switch is on, bridging these two pads here. So I cut out a little piece, and now I'm going to strip the leads. So now taking my pliers, I'm going to bend the leads so that I can insert them into on the protoboard. I have a lead that's pre-bent. I'm going to go ahead and insert that here. So if I had measured and cut this correctly, it should just fit right on in, and it does. Okay, so looking at the board a little bit closer, we can see that we have enough lead going through the proto board to solder. So I'm going to tape the back side of the proto board to hold that, or use my previously used tape here. I'm going to tape this down to hold this in place. I'm going to solder this connection and this connection here. Okay. So now this is bridged, and now we have to go to V out. If you remember, we need to bridge from here to V out on the power regulator, which is this top pin here. So I'm going to cut off another small piece and strip the end. So I'm going to go from here to the first this pad right here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bridge those connections. I kind of press everything down. We're going from the V out into the first pole of the switch. When it's in the on position, it will send regulated power to the power rail.
I'll go ahead and tape this down.
So what I'm going to solder now is this pad and this pad here. If you remember that we need to connect the ground to the power regulator. The ground is connected to the third pin. So we're going to bridge these two connections here. So we're going to cut off a little bit of black wire. And I'm going to strip off a little bit of wire at both ends. Now, as you can see, I have the piece kind of bent in place. I'm going to insert it, bridging the third pin on the voltage regulator and the ground.
Next, we'll solder this pad and this pad.
So now, let's go ahead and place the battery compartment. So I'm going to remove the backing for the double stick tape, and I'm going to place it onto the proto board. Okay. So the key thing is you want it as centered as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this around and bring it closer to the camera. And place it onto the proto board where I have enough room for the standoffs to sit on it. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this. And that looks about centered, and I'm going to press it onto the proto board. And so now, and I'll bring this a little bit closer so you can see it. I left enough room at the top so that when we place the standoffs to do the final assembly, there's enough room to be able to place them. And now, kind of for the tricky part. So we have these really long leads from the battery compartment. We're going to have to cut them a little bit shorter. I'm going to do them a little bit longer so it gives me a little bit of room for error. Okay? And that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to connect the positive lead, which is this one here, okay, from the battery compartment. We're going to connect it to the VN, which is this pin here. And we're going to connect the ground, or the negative portion of the battery compartment, to the ground rail here. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this up. Leaving a little bit of lead, and having a little bit of lead is good. I'm going to do the same thing with the positive lead of the battery compartment. And then trim it up. Next, we'll strip the negative lead, and we'll do the same for the positive lead. Okay. And this wire is braided. So we'll need to do what's referred to as tinning. And what tinning is putting a little bit of solder on the ends of that, and that keeps the braid together and makes it easier for us to solder the wire. So okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and tin it. So let me get this situated into the camera a little bit better so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on the ends of this, like so. So the first thing I'm going to do is solder the positive lead of the battery compartment to VN. So now I have this kind of pushed through, like so. And I probably don't need to tape that. Looks like it's being held in place pretty well. Okay. All right, let's get this in focus. The lead that I'm going to solder now is for the battery compartment. the positive lead for the battery compartment. It's this one right here. It's kind of a little hard to see, but if I just have this little probe on behind it, you can kind of see I'm pushing it around here. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to solder that in place. I'm just doing a quick inspection. Yeah, it looks pretty good. All right, so now using my pliers, I'm going to insert the negative lead from the battery compartment into the ground rail. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, that looks pretty good. So something like that. Okay, and it looks like I don't need to tape that down, so I'm not. Okay, so I'm going to rotate this around, and as you can probably see, we're going to solder this pad right here. Everything is kind of connected together. Just push this up just a little bit. You can see that that in fact the battery is connected to VN, which is here. It's the second pin. Ground is connected to the third pin, and V out is connected to the switch. The first position on the switch, the second position is connected to the power rail, and when it's off, it's not connected. All right, so now we have to test this thing. So with my handy dandy digital meter, I'm going to have that out. I'm going to set it to voltage. And we're going to take the 3 AAA batteries and load this up. All right. So, as we measure this, we want to make sure that the battery meter, or the digital multimeter, is set to DC volts, not AC. And we're going to measure the round pad and the square pad. The round pad is your positive. It's connected to your power rail, and the square pad is connected to the ground rail. So with the switch off, I'm going to install the power regulator. So now I'm going to turn this on. We have this thing wired properly, so I'm reading 3.35 volts. So just to show you, 3.35 volts is what we're seeing through the rails when the switch is turned on. And when the switch is turned off, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1 millivolts, 0. So 0 volts. And when it's on, 3.35 volts. And that's exactly what we need to see. This completes the assembly of our battery board.